We're delighted to have you. This is please welcome our lecture series, conversations about things that matter. You know, the microphone even sounds different. Anyway, we're meeting tonight at the Chapel multi-purpose room at the Westmont Downtown Keith Center for the first time. And this is our new home for Westmont Downtown, the lecture series, and we're very excited about it. It'll be our new home, I think, for a very long time. It's available to us. And as you all know, this series is a gift to the community, that the professors at Westmont work very hard to present a presentation that we all are interested in. And I think we've been doing it for 19 years, maybe 20 years. And the series consists of 4 separate presentations. And our second Westmont Spring presentation will be about AI, which is always fascinating. And it's AI and our shared future, fundamental and lively conversations. And the series consists of 4, The series, when I'm reading this, it's Mike Rio, and he's a Westmont professor of computer science, and Reed Sheard, Westmont Vice President of Advancement and Chief Information Officer. And I think it'll be just absolutely fascinating. This evening, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Leanne Dubinsky, who will introduce our speaker, Laura Drake Schultheis. Dr. Dubinsky is the Dean of Faculty Development and Global Education at Westmont. She joined the Provost's office in the fall of 2024. She is a seasoned academic administrator with over a decade of experience in the classroom and administrative leadership roles. She has also lived and taught internationally and is fluent in Spanish and German. And conversant in Catalan. She earned a PhD from the University of Georgia and taught at Asbury Theological Seminary and also Biola University before coming to Westmont. She has served for 18 years in cross-cultural ministry. She is the author of several books. One is Confronting Sacred Inequalities, Creating Christian Organizations Where Women Thrive, and another book titled Playing by the Rules. She is co-author of the book Glass Walls and Women in the Mission of the Church, as well as numerous journal and articles. So welcome, and I hope you all enjoy this really fascinating talk, and I hope I have a garden, and I'm going to follow everything you say.
Thank you. Well, it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Laura Drake Schultheis, for tonight's talk. She is a graduate of Westmont College, where she earned a BS in biology and her California secondary teaching credential. After teaching science at the middle, high school, and college levels, she went on to graduate school at UC Santa Barbara, where she earned a master's degree and a PhD in plant ecology and ecophysiology. Her graduate work focused on the roles of drought and introduced opportunistic fungi in dieback and mortality of manzanita shrubs. She began teaching full-time at Westmont in 2020, which was a hard year to start, I will just say, where she has since been exploring other research interests related to plants and climate change, including responses to drought, fire ecology and fuel management, and restoration ecology. So let's welcome Dr. Schultheis for our talk tonight.
Thank you, Leanne, for that warm introduction, and thank you all for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces. Thank you for coming, and some new faces. And thank you to the Westmont Foundation for making these events possible. Tonight, I'm going to share a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing since getting hired full-time at Westmont, which includes restoring an invaded fuel corridor to a native oak woodland on Westmont's campus, and also measuring plant traits associated with flammability to better inform planting practices in fire-prone regions. Before I begin, however, I need to acknowledge some partners in these endeavors. None of what I will be talking about today has been done by myself. It's only through funding, collaborations, and partnerships from a wide variety of incredible groups, some of which are represented here today, that I'm able to talk to you at all tonight. So I just really want to start by acknowledging and thanking everybody on this slide. All right, so as Leanne mentioned, I am an ecologist, a plant ecologist. So I thought, given this general audience, I'd start with the question, what is ecology? It's a good place to start. So I really love the root of this word, actually. Eco comes from the Greek word oikos, which means home. And we all know ology is the study of. So ecology is literally the study of our home, which I just love. Getting a little bit more technical, it addresses how living and non-living systems interact with one another. So all the plants, the animals, the fungi, the bugs, the microbes, and then all of the environmental variables as well. So soil, sunlight, water, climate, fire, etc., all play into this larger category of ecology. So it's a really complex and dynamic field of study that keeps me curious every day and often keeps me awake at night. There's multiple levels of ecology from the individual organism. So like you might ask questions about the physiological adaptations that a species has for surviving in its unique environment. That's a lot of what I did with the ecophysiology of manzanita shrubs in this drought-tolerant region. To the ecosystem level, like how does a system function together with all the living and non-living components that I just mentioned in the previous slide. And then even the biosphere, so all of the earth and how the systems are connected. And what I really love about ecology, and the reason why we can study ecology on all of these different levels, is that everything is connected. Everything on Earth, including humans, exists as a part of a complex, interconnected system. And as a biology major at Westmont, I became really fascinated by this concept of interconnectedness and trying to understand these interactions and these relationships in the natural world. So ecology became a really good fit to pursue my curiosities. Why plants, you might ask? It's a good question. I grew up loving animals. I thought I might be a wildlife biologist as I looked at studying ecosystems and how we understand them on a larger scale. I realized that nothing is there without the plants. None of the animals are there without the plants. They're the ones to arrive first, and they're the ones that kind of determine who else can live there. So I realized that in order to understand what was going on really in these ecosystems, I had to start with the plants first in order to understand all the rest. Now, I used to work with people that were soil microbiologists, and they would tell you that it all starts with the soil and the microbes, which is true, but my interests began at the macro level with the plants. Also, I became really fascinated by California native plants, like the one you see here, Big Berry Manzanita in the chaparral, as well as desert landscapes. And the reason I got really interested in them is because I would hike around, this was before grad school, I'd hike around thinking about, it's October, it's November, these plants haven't had any water in 6, 7, 8 months, none at all, or more if it's the desert landscape. And I started to wonder, how do they do that? How is that? That was another question that kept me up. I don't know if the same things keep you up at night, but those questions keep me up at night. So it became a natural, it was just a natural decision for me to pursue studying plants. Additionally, as I was, trying to figure out what I was going to study, 2 major fires occurred in Santa Barbara during that time. I was living in Santa Barbara and teaching. The Tea Fire and the Jesucita Fire. Many of you in this room remember those very well. And I saw these barren landscapes following the fires with nothing left behind, and then started to see stuff come back pretty quickly. and started to see in some areas certain plants would come back, and in other areas other plants would come back, and these were in the same fire scars. So it got me wondering about how things grow back following fire, what factors influence these trajectories. And so even though I spent my time in graduate school, like in the ecophysiology world, kind of on a smaller scale, since returning to Westmont full-time as faculty, I've been able to get back to these questions of fire and the natural landscape. So many of us in this room understand that wildfire is a natural phenomenon, but that it can leave really devastating impacts. So ecologically, wildfires endanger ecosystems and biodiversity. For people, for us, it can pose a direct risk to human populations by threatening buildings, homes, and even lives. We've learned this very well, and personally from our local wildfires, and again, very recently with the LA fires just over a year ago. And of course, fire risk itself presents financial and economic consequences, which I'm sure hits very close to home for anyone in the audience paying thousands of dollars in insurance premiums every year for their fire insurance. Okay, so at this point, I've mentioned ecological consequences and also personal and economic consequences. I'd like to pause and recognize that talking about fire and fire risk in human inhabited areas can be a really contentious topic. There's historically a lot of tension between sort of environmentally minded people like ecologists and those who have been directly affected by fire or are fighting fires themselves. So I brought this up with a colleague of mine who's actually in the audience a few days ago as I was preparing for this presentation. And she said wisely, she said, oh, and you're worried about offending a few people in the room over a contentious, topic. Just cover your bases and offend everyone, and then things will be equal, right? So I thought that was really good advice. So first I'm going to share with you the perfect home for an ecologist. This is the dream home for an ecologist, right, or environmentalist. It's a almost entirely wooden house in the forest, and all the trees and the plants are growing up against the house. I see my fire personnel in here just like cringing right now. Yes, this is the perfect home, right? The perfect environment to just live one with nature. Okay, so I've offended the fire personnel in here properly. Okay, good. Now I'll offend the ecologists. Here's the perfect home, says the firefighter. Look at it. It's made of fire-resistant materials, lots of concrete and stonework, and has this bare landscape nearby with there's a clear defensible space around it with no vegetation. Okay, so now I've offended the ecologists and the environmentalists in the room, right? Okay, so now that we've addressed this tension, I want to communicate that this intersection of seemingly competing interests is where I spend a lot of my time in my research and a lot of time thinking about, and I think it's a really important space to be in right now. There's a lot to learn about it. It's a very complex system, but there are a lot of people, including myself, many of whom are much smarter than I am, but working very hard to understand how there can be a balance between preserving our natural and native wildlands while also protecting the human communities in and around them, all in the face of a rapidly changing climate. So it's super dynamic and super complex, but such is the field of ecology. So, okay, now that we're going to dive into fire, I thought we'd do a little bit of Q&A. I will get to my research, I will, but I'm just warming you guys up a little bit. Because you came to a fire talk, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not telling you which plants are going to save your home. I'm not going to be able to do that today. I'm not going to tell you how to landscape your yard, but I hope you leave here with some information that's helpful, some knowledge gained about fires and wildlands, and also some hope and encouragement of how you can get involved and what work is being done in the community. All right, so we'll start here. Fact or fiction? Most California wildfires today are caused by human ignitions. Well, I guess it depends on the data set. Anne-Marie, you can call me out on this one. But according to the National Interagency Fire Center, these are data from 2025, This is fact. If we look at all of the recorded fires across the agencies or the different lands and how they're collecting the data, fires, human-caused fires account for over 7,000 of the California fires versus lightning, which is 1,259. We can also look at that in terms of acreage. So that's the number of fires. Here's the acreage. And again, human-caused is higher in acreage than lightning-caused. Okay, next, fact or fiction? California native plants are fire resistant. Oh, I'm gonna really push you on this one. Okay, I'm gonna call this one fiction. Here's a picture on the left is the Woolsey Fire. That was a previously native plant landscape, like woodland, with a lot of like fire resistant or fire adapted plants. I don't see many left. I would not call that fire resistant. And on the right is our beloved coast live oak, often coined as being a fuel buffer or fire resistant. It looks like it did, I mean, the fire has passed, but it's still on fire. It's still burning. And so that's another dynamic that plays into like fire risk and flammability. It's doing pretty well. It hasn't come down yet, but it's on fire. So I would not call that fire resistant. So I might change this to say we could make this fact if we say, okay, many California fire plants are fire resilient. Maybe that could be a more correct term. Anyway, people can challenge me on that, but that's what I'm calling that statement now. All right, here's a big one. Here's a big one, and I might get in trouble for this, but we'll see. Fact or fiction? Fire suppression increases fire severity. Yes. I hear some yeses. Yes. Right, suppression. So preventing fires, like actively suppressing fires through, Smokey the Bear, saying don't cause forest fires, putting out forest fires right away, not letting them burn in wildland areas, not in inhabited areas. Obviously, we need to put those out, but like in open wild areas, forested areas, actively stopping them before they spread. Campaigns that teach the community that suppression is good.
Would you include controlled burns?
Controlled burns, yeah, would be absolutely. So fire suppression would be no controlled burns. Yeah. Okay. There's kind of two answers here. And this, again, maybe this is a little tidbit of information you'll learn tonight. So it depends. We have a lot of different ecosystems in California, and I'm going to very broadly break them up into like Northern California forest lands versus Southern California shrublands, even though there's a lot of overlap between the two. But if we're looking at a Northern California coast redwood forest, take a look at this. This is kind of your typical scene. This is actually kind of fact, whereby a healthy coast redwood forest would have some vegetation, low-growing vegetation, but not a lot, pretty low. And then the canopy of those giant redwoods, right? They're the tallest trees in the world, the giant redwoods. And then a lot of space in between. And that's what we would expect to see if fires were allowed to regularly come through, is they just burn the understory. We call that basically like a ground fire. What happens when we get fire suppression is that this is time zero, let's say, of this community. After 80 years without fire suppression, without fire suppression, the fire is allowed to come through. 80 years with fire suppression, meaning not allowing controlled burns, not allowing wildfires to go through, you can see all this growth occurring. All of that understory vegetation is starting to grow up, creating what we call ladder fuels. And this can be problematic because instead of just having ground or surface fires, which occur very low, the fires that do come through now climb up these so-called ladders, vegetation ladders, reaching the canopies, and they turn into crown fires, which are a much different dynamic. They're hotter, they spread faster, they're more destructive. So that can be very problematic. So in this case, yeah, in like a typical Northern California forested system, fire suppression definitely can increase fire severity because crown fires burn hotter and are more destructive. However, if we're talking Southern California and our shrublands, like here in Santa Barbara, I'm going to call this fiction. Here is a classic scene here. This isn't Santa Barbara. This is actually Pacific Palisades. And this is a very typical scene in the shrublands. You can see, I mean, imagine our shrublands, and you can see in this picture, all low-growing shrubs, pretty much the same height. When a fire comes through the shrublands, the chaparral shrublands, it's all crown fire. There's no ground fire. Everything's low, so it's all crown fire. It's all hot burning, high severity. It doesn't matter if it's been 30 years or 150 years, which is kind of the historical fire regime timeline for chaparral. If there's mature chaparral, it's going to burn hot. It's going to be a crown fire that burns hot. So I would actually change this. It's not fire suppression increasing fire severity. It's really just different factors at play. In this case, you can see all the human activity nearby. So lots of humans, lots of development means more sources of ignition, and that's been the problem with California shrublands, Southern California shrublands, is an increase in the number of ignitions. I would change this to human activity increases fire frequency. The severity is pretty much going to be the same if you have mature chaparral, but it's going to be happening a lot more quickly and with shorter intervals in between. Okay, so now you have a little bit of, some factoids, some trivia with you regarding California wildfires. Going off of this slide, sorry for you in the room, I keep pointing to this one, but we've got two here, two screens. It's very, very technologically advanced. This system right here, where you have shrublands that are intermixed with human development and activity that is altering the fire regime, meaning how frequently fires are occurring. It doesn't have to do with fire suppression. It has to do with more human activity there, igniting more fires. Nowhere is this more true than in the WUI, which that picture was a picture of the WUI. The WUI is the Wildland-Urban Interface. It's a transition zone where rural wildland areas and human development intersect. And it's often in and around residential communities. This heat map here shows the distribution of WUI areas in Southern California, colored in orange and red. Santa Barbara, right here, where the star is, pretty much nestled right in the WUI. Okay? So why is the WUI significant? Why is this significant? Well, of all the land use types in the United States, WUI areas experience the most wildfire destruction. And this is because development is increasing, human population sizes are increasing, and in these areas it tends to lead to an increase in human-caused ignitions, as I mentioned before, and thus more frequent fires in densely populated areas. In fact, California has 11 million people living in the WUI. This is the highest number in the nation. So it should really come as no surprise that maintaining defensible spaces around homes and infrastructure is crucial for creating buffer zones that can help protect property. And this is where we come really back home to Westmont College, where I teach and where I do a lot of my research. Westmont College, if you haven't been there before, here's a picture of the campus. You can see science building right here, and here's the baseball fields for context. It sits on the south-facing foothills of the Santa Ynez Mountain Range, and it is right in the WUI. Here in this red circle, this is all native chaparral and mixed shrubland, just budding right up against the campus. Okay. Not only is the campus right in the WUI, but the neighboring communities, including Las Broncas, which is the faculty housing nearby. So here's when faculty housing was just completed, and you can see it's just nestled right there in this narrow region that is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of wildfire. Also, the area has been pretty heavily populated by non-native eucalyptus. If you drive around Montecito, you see them everywhere. These were planted by early ranchers and developers of the area. They're native to Australia. They do really well here because it's a similar climate. But as many of you know, they live about 100, 150 years. When they get old, they start falling. A lot of branches fall during windstorms, things like that. And they do have pretty flammable canopies. This right here in the circle is a native or non-native eucalyptus corridor on Westmont's campus, and this arrow is pointing the direction to the Las Barrancas housing community that I just mentioned. When the Tea Fire broke out above Westmont on the evening of November 13th, 2008, the path of the fire took two directions across campus. So one went through campus here, burning through kind of a wooded area and burning some buildings on campus along the way. The other pathway went right through this fuel corridor containing the eucalyptus. The fire then continued to Las Barrancas, the housing community, faculty housing community, and some of the nearby communities. The fuels for the Montecito Fire, number one, there was recent drought. Things were dry. So we had a really severe drought that lasted from 2007 to 2009. This was smack dab in the middle of it. So things were very, very dry to begin with. If you live in the area and you were here then, you remember that night, it was a sundowner winds night. So winds were clocked at up to 70 miles per hour, and this can create ember cast where these embers from the fire get blown from canopy to canopy via the wind. And so when they're spreading across particularly flammable surfaces like dry canopies from drought, then it perpetuates the spread. Eucalyptus are really well known for their easily combustible and sometimes exploding canopies due to some of the volatile oils. Some of you may know this. So a lot of that was all contributing to it. And then, I just said this. That was the dry canopies, for example, the eucalyptus. And those are actual photos, by the way, from the Tea Fire. And here's a picture I just wanted to show. This was in the parking lot right next to that fuel corridor, and you can see that ember cast. Okay, so that's those embers, those burning embers being flown and they're being thrown by the wind, and that's on the ground level. You can imagine if they're up in the canopies being blown by the wind. The damage ultimately by the Tea Fire, acreage-wise, it was pretty small. About 2,000 acres, but 210 homes were lost, including 14 in Las Barrancas. And some of at the time, I had recently graduated Westmont, so it was a lot of my professors and friends, now colleagues, who lost their homes in the fire as well. On campus at Westmont, the physics lab, psychology, and math buildings and residence halls were also lost, which I know some people in this room vividly remember. All right, so following the fire, Westmont's campus underwent extensive renovation, restoration, and fire mitigation efforts. In July 2023, Montecito Fire Department used FEMA funds to lead a major vegetation clearing and management effort in the areas surrounding Westmont's campus. And this included the eucalyptus fuel corridor and involved clearing overgrown weeds to reduce fuel loads, and removing hazardous trees like dead and dying eucalyptus. So if we see these before photos, you can see hazardous fuels, those large eucalyptus, there's some dead ones in there, and a lot of non-native vegetation growing down below. So they removed these, and afterwards you can see major clearing there. So that was all done by Montecito Fire Department, again using these FEMA funds to help reduce fire risk in that area adjacent to Westmont. The site has also been used since the Tea Fire, this exact site, by Montecito Fire as a staging area for subsequent disasters, including the 2017 Thomas Fire and the 2018 Montecito debris flow. So there's been lots of degradation to this site, a lot of machinery used, a lot of soil compaction, a lot of non-natives continue to be brought in. And this is why the idea to restore the site to a native oak woodland came up in the first place. So I decided I wanted to throw in a slide real quick and just pause because I don't want to make any assumptions of the audience here and just define what restoration means. I know a lot of people probably have these ideas in their mind of what restoration is. I'm going to take the ecological perspective, which is straight out of the book of the Society for Ecological Restoration, which defines it as the process of assisting in the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. I'm going to highlight this word assisting here because I will come back to that word. I think it's a really important word to hone in on. All right, so this site, and I don't know if you're going to be able to even see it on these screens. We'll see, but some collaborators with the Spatial Informatics Group and Natural Assets Laboratory, they were the ones who identified this site as in need of fire mitigation to begin with as a high fire risk area. What they did is they mapped, they overlaid scar maps of the Thomas Fire and the T Fire. Those are the dotted lines. And right here, I don't know if you can see it, there's a little black outline there. There's this eucalyptus corridor and the surrounding areas. So they identified the area in and around this eucalyptus fuel corridor as very high hazard rating and therefore in high need of fire mitigation. So we wrote a grant together with the Regional Fire Mitigation Program and got funding to begin restoration at the site to continue these mitigation efforts. If we look in, sorry, were you taking a picture? I can go back if you, did you get it? Okay, all right, good. So here's an aerial view of the oak restoration site. Here's Westmont's campus. You can see with the arrows, there's the Thomas Fire boundary again and the T Fire boundary in the solid line. And then the little yellow polygons represent the planting areas in this eucalyptus corridor. Okay. Oh yeah, I circled them so you can see them a little bit better. And we knew coast live oak, the native coast live oak, Quercus agrifolia, would be a good fit for this spot because much of the area historically contained native oak woodland. This arrow, by the way, is pointing to what would become Las Barrancas before it was actually developed. I had to go into the Westmont Library archives for these pictures and identify that, yeah, in fact, the historical photos show the presence of native oaks in the surrounding area. And we also have remnant native oaks that are present throughout campus. So we knew that this was a good fit. When you're restoring something, you always want to make sure, like, do we know what was there before? And do we have evidence of that so that we are promoting the original ecosystem that was there? Here's just a couple of fun photos, again, from the development of Las Barrancas. And you can see lots of native coast live oaks all throughout the community, even as they're developing. So we knew that this was going to be a good fit as an ecosystem to focus on for restoration. All right, now to the restoration goals. So number one was to mitigate fire risk to Westmont College and the surrounding neighborhoods. So part of that was the vegetation clearing that Montecito Fire department helped us with and was really instrumental in. And then the next stage of that was helping to restore the native ecosystem. So part of that would be establishing a sustainable native oak habitat. And sustainable, this is where I go back to that definition of ecological restoration where it says to assist in the restoration of a degraded site, because ideally we wouldn't have to continue putting work into it year out. It's a lot of work, you'll see in the next slides. It's a lot of work to get this off the ground. Ideally, you want this system back running on its own. So to establish a sustainable native oak woodland means that eventually over time, this system, maybe with a little bit of help, but not having to go out and water every weekend and not having to weed all the time, will develop into more of a self-sustaining system. We also wanted the site to be able to provide opportunities for education, serve as sort of an outdoor classroom for biology classes, environmental studies classes, and others. Research opportunities, and so that's for myself as well as engaging my students, and I already have students that have been engaging in research pertaining to ecological questions at this site. More on that in a few minutes. And recreation, so just a place that people can come and enjoy, walk through, hang out, be at peace and at one with nature. And lastly, enhance the ecological functioning and resiliency of an oak woodland. So again, this goes back to just assisting the community in getting back to maybe what closer to what it once was. All right. So in our process, locally sourced acorns were collected. These were collected by the Santa Barbara Botanic Gardens and volunteers that were working with them. They were grown out at the UCSB greenhouse, and then they were transferred to Westmont for planting. We were really deliberate about the spacing. These are based on CAL FIRE recommendations. So you can see on the right here, these are recommended spacings for oaks on flat, moderate, and steep slopes. So you can see it varies depending on the type of slope, and so we kept all of these in mind. This is so that the crowns will not be touching when they become adults, because touching crowns, even if it's a native oak, can still result in transfer of fire and likelihood of embercast. We dug holes. We made them 18 inches, which can be really hard in some soils, but that was for rooting depth because oaks they have a deep tap root, and so they like to go down deep. Wire cage tubes for the gophers and growth tube sheaths. These are these white tubes for both encouragement of them growing up vertically and also to prevent herbivory from deer and such. We also had a lot of labor help. So Watershed Progressive was contracted. They're out of Ojai. They came and brought a team. I had student volunteers come. There's one of them in this picture. Also some family volunteers. You can see my then 6-year-old son sticking his tongue out at me, clearly enjoying the labor. All in all, we planted about 60 individuals, and to date, so this was in 2023, to date we have about a 90% survival rate, which is pretty darn good for oak restoration. The site continues to need management at this point. It's still a very young site. Oak restoration, you're playing the long game. Many of the oaks are slow growing. Some of them will not reach maturity and start producing their own acorns until like 20, 25 years from now. So we are definitely playing the long game and trying to just get them established. First is weeding. There's so many weeds. This is Janelle. She used to be our garden coordinator and sustainability manager. And when we started this project, she put many hours into this. And she's just a weeding maniac. She loves it. So we also had larger scale weed whacking that was done in partnership with Montecito Fire Department. They had funds for that, and that was very helpful. We also had some help from sheep. They came in last year, and they did a tremendous job. Way better than the hand crew. So they're going to come back this summer as well. And that was Kuyama Lamb that came in and did that. We did a lot of watering. We had the fortune of a lot of rain when we planted them, also this winter, but we'll probably need water throughout the summer dry season to increase the chance of survival just as they get established. Whoops. And then monitoring. So this is where the undergrads come in. By the way, you'll see these white suits. These are because there's lots of poison oak at the site. So we get to suit up in these full body Tyvek suits so nobody gets poison oak. It's great fun, especially on hot days. But those are my students out there just this week, measuring tree survival and condition, so whether or not they survived, and also if they are in good, poor, fair condition, etc. And they're also measuring tree height. Many of them, this is just 2 years later, they're popping out of those tubes. Look at those guys. That one's showing off. They're pretty great. And then I also have had teams of undergrads go out and measure understory. So one of the things we're trying to measure as a form of monitoring, like the success of a restoration site, is what the understory looked like in terms of native and non-native cover at the time of the planting, and then what it looks like 5, 10, 20 years out. So we're monitoring that as well. So there's Sierra and Jenny, that was last summer. There they are in the tall. There's a field of mustard. So lots of non-native cover right now, but there they are in their Tyvek suits, getting down, collecting data on the plants. We actually we do have some pretty cool natives there, including some rare species like Santa Barbara honeysuckle and some native bunch grasses that I haven't seen in a lot of other places. So they're in there, but hopefully over time we'll get them a better chance at survival. Future plans, we are planning site expansion and continued oak planting in the areas kind of on the periphery of the current site. There's going to be still a lot of eucalyptus removal and other non-native trees that we would like to. Factors to consider is that we want to avoid more soil compaction. We want to have little to no impact on the existing planted oaks. So like will consider not taking down trees if it means it's going to knock down the newly planted ones. It's also these eucalyptus, for everything else that they're really good raptor and woodpecker habitats. And so we know that if we were to remove all of them at once, that would create kind of like an ecosystem vacuum. Don't know where all of those would go. So a gradual removal is preferable to just taking them all out at once as we try to recover that vertical ecosystem that we're losing by taking them out. And then native fire-wise understory restoration. So as we continue the site, we're hoping to build in plans to plant native understory vegetation. And this is where I get to talk to you briefly about some of my work regarding fire-wise plant traits and what we mean by fire-wise. A lot of plant palettes exist out there. This palette came from my collaborators at Signal, but you'll notice that it has a lot to do with sun and shade tolerance and also drought tolerance, which are important for California, but a lot less is known about fire-wise plants or fire-resistant plants and how to build those palettes. So what are fire-wise plant lists? Well, in an effort to encourage more awareness of defensible space and in planning and implementation, many fire-wise lists have been created and distributed publicly across high fire risk communities like ours and others situated in the WUI. And while these lists are part of public efforts towards cost-effective education and fire management, they tend to be inconsistent and lack the data to back them. For example, the UC Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources evaluated about 53 lists used in California, and what they found is that the results were unreliable, lacking scientific definition, lacking consistency, and had conflicting recommendations. So not to throw shade on any of these lists or these efforts, it just means that more work needs to be done. More research into plant flammability is needed for developing science-based, reliable understanding of fire risks that different plant species pose to communities and to the environment. So, good time to pause. This is my transition now to my plant flammability project with UCSB. Good time to pause and ask, what is flammability? This is a really hard term to define. Essentially, it's a propensity to burn. And there's a lot of terms that we use in the fire ecology world to describe different components of flammability. I'm going to give you two helpful ones to kind of put it in perspective. So one is ignitability, which is how quickly something catches on fire, and one is intensity, how hot something burns. So you can imagine this being really important when we're trying to think about recommendations for fire-wise plant lists, right? I find this figure is really helpful for visualizing it. This is from Pausas et al. 2017 in the Journal of Ecology. On the x-axis here is the flame spread rate, and on the y-axis is heat release. Here in this green would be non-flammable, but over in the yellow, fast flammable, that would be like high ignitability, right? It ignites really fast. Hot flammable would be high intensity, okay, or related to high intensity, and heat release, burning really, really hot and intense, and able to catch other things on fire really easily. So this becomes really complex really fast because plants don't fall neatly into the category of just high flammability. There's multiple variables involved, and this is a pretty simplified version of it. So you can imagine, by the way, my apologies to my colleague Nicole Molinari, because I put her in a very flammable grassland here. But a grassland, like an annual grassland like this ripgut brome, highly invasive European grass that's annual, has high ignitability. It's like kindling. It's like matchsticks. Can catch on fire super easily. But the fire doesn't burn really intensely. It'll go through fast, but it's not intense, isn't putting out a lot of heat. Contrast that with a coast live oak, and it's got really low ignitability. It takes a lot to catch an oak on fire, but if it does catch on fire, here's that picture from earlier, it burns really intense, and actually even like long after the fire is gone, it can continue to be burning and smoldering. So these are the sort of things that we're trying to grapple with and understand, and when we're trying to recommend or understand flammability and recommend the most beneficial plants and plant traits. So when we're so lots of research is focused on understanding fuel risk at the plant level and identifying the traits that are most strongly associated with flammability. So this won't be on the test, don't worry, but some examples of traits associated with flammability are leaf level traits, leaf area, specific leaf area, leaf thickness, stem traits, so stem specific density and twig dry matter content, and also whole plant traits on the whole plant level. So life history, that's if it's annual versus perennial, growth form, so if it's a grass or a shrub or a tree, height, branching architecture, all of these. And we can then measure these traits and create indices that allow us to quantify flammability. But questions still remain on which of these are the most important for predicting fuel risk and how well they scale across life forms. So the question really that we're asking in this part of my research is if particular, can plant trait measurements be used to predict larger scale flammability and behavior? And if particular plant measurements are able to indicate whole flammability, then we can maybe provide better, more accurate recommendations for creating defensible space in high-risk communities. So for this research, we got to go out to the Botanic Garden. We got to spend all summer at the Botanic Garden measuring plant traits. The office could get a lot worse, right? So we did Botanic Gardens and also UCSB North Open Space. We collected data on 23 native California species that are commonly found throughout the Santa Barbara area and got 10 individuals per species. And these species were chosen to represent a variety of life forms, their use in native plant landscaping, and also their presence in the WUI. And so we collaborated with the gardens actually, and we said like, hey, what plants do people tend to like to buy to use for landscaping? And we tried to incorporate them into our data set to make sure it was really relevant. And then we measured 16 traits overall, ranging from individual leaf level to the whole plant scale. And then the traits are selected given their strong relationship with aspects of plant flammability, like you saw on the last slide. And then once we collect the data, those data for traits were averaged across species, and each species received a ranking from 1 to 23 based on each of their average trait values following the trait's relationship to flammability. All right, so here are some data. On the x-axis here is jargon to you. Those are species codes. You do not need to know them. On the y-axis is the flammability ranking, so where they were low to high. So on the low end is less flammable, and on the upper end is more flammable. And we are also actually able to bin them according to high, moderate, and low flammability risk. So here we see there is a spectrum where those plants fell out. Not a whole lot of low flammable plants in California, Southern California natives. But a lot of them are adapted for drought. They get dry and they survive, and that's what they do. So it's not too surprising that we don't have a lot of like lush, full of water plants here in Southern California. Many of them fell into the moderate flammability, and then we did get some high flammability ones. I'm not gonna go through all the details. What do you wanna know? Probably I'll give you the highest and the lowest, right? And I'll break those down for you. So we'll start with the least flammable. And if you want to know all the in-betweens, you can come to, I'll show you the data later, but there were too many to show here. So the least flammable, these will be recognizable to a lot of you. We had narrowleaf milkweed was least flammable, field sedge followed by California poppy. By the way, I underlined their life form down here and habit because it was interesting. These were all perennial like herb-like species that were on the low flammability scale. Contrast that with our most flammable. We had a salvia. There were a lot of salvias in this list. The desperado, which is actually a hybrid between white sage and purple sage, is a perennial shrub. It grows really tall. It gets dry leaves. Makes sense. And then actually 2 of our native bunch grasses were also at the top of the list. Deer grass and purple needlegrass, with purple needlegrass being the most flammable. It's smaller than the shrubs, but it's got all of that like long vegetation, long leaves, and a lot of dead material that can accumulate seasonally. So we did some other analyses. I'm not going to show them here, but what we're able to do is we can kind of combine these traits and see which ones are correlated with one another, and also start binning these groups of plants, the grasses and the herbs and the shrubs, and start ranking them accordingly as well to try and come up with these more clear indicators for flammability. Future work here, we're going to continue data collection with more species, because more data is always great. Helps build the data set, helps build the confidence in our results. This summer, I'm going to be getting I have another team of undergrads that I just hired, and we're going to be collaborating with UCSB using a flame chamber. We're actually put into practice this idea of flammable traits. We actually take plants and we burn them, and we measure things like time to ignition, flame height, and heat output to see if those traits that we associate with flammability actually result in flammability of the plant. And this will just help us to refine our index parameters. And then we'll use these results to inform, hopefully, be able to inform understory planting at the restoration site. So as we start to get a better understanding of what plants are better to be used for a high fire risk zone, like the oak or the eucalyptus fuel corridor, then we can start using those plants in our understory planting. So getting back to the Westmont Oak restoration goals, the restoration itself, as well as these flammability tests and rankings, all help us to accomplish these three major goals that we're getting at with the restoration site. Again, this is a continued work in process, and oak restoration is a long-term endeavor. So this isn't an overnight thing, but something that we'll be able to see for decades to come, the outcomes of. As we work at the site, oftentimes we have people from the Las Barrancas community walking by, seeing us in our white suits, seeing us working on the land, and expressing their gratitude for the work that we're doing, which is really humbling and has been a really unexpected part of this process. These are people who live in the community next door, feeling they value that we're doing the work, they value that it's being restored, that it's starting to look more like a native habitat, and they also value the added sense of security that we are doing things to try and mitigate fire risk in the area. So I really hope that this project represents healing, security, and connection to the land for those whose lives were changed forever in the Tea Fire. And I also hope it serves as a template and inspiration for future projects in the region. All right, so I told you that I wanted you to feel like you were more knowledgeable about this topic following my talk, that you felt encouraged and empowered to get involved. So I'm going to throw some resources at you. This is by no means an all-inclusive list, but if you are interested in getting connected with restoration opportunities in town, well, there's Westmont. You can come visit my site and volunteer with my team. There's also the Cheadle Center for Biodiversity and Ecological Restoration, or CBER, that's with UCSB, and there's also Channel Islands Restoration. They do wonderful work. If you're interested in fire mitigation and learning more, there are some good lists out there and good recommendations for fire mitigation. Santa Barbara Fire Safe Council, also in partnership with FireWise USA, has a lot of great resources. If you join them, then you can attend their meetings. They have regular meetings to talk about these important issues and how they're related to our community. Santa Barbara Botanic Garden does restoration as well, but is also engaged in the conversation of how to understand plant flammability and flammability traits and how to make recommendations for better planting practices, and also fuels reduction programs in your local communities. Like, for example, if you're in Montecito, Montecito Fire Department does a fuels reduction program, and if you haven't heard of them and you live in Montecito, let me know, because they should have come knocking on your door to give you information already. You should have seen them out and about, but they do really great work helping to inform the community and get people involved with creating defensible space. So there's lots of resources out there. There's a lot of people working to understand this complex system. Remember, in ecology, everything is connected, and that includes us as well as our native and natural communities. So I just encourage you to get out there, get involved, either through resources or volunteering yourself to help in the process of making our communities more more resilient, healthy functioning ecosystems, and better defensible in the face of fire. So thank you for your time. And we started late. I don't know if we have time for questions because it's 6:30 on the dot now. Yeah? I'm getting the thumbs up. So if there are any questions, I will take questions. Yeah.
Might be a little bit off the topic. I wanted to get your opinion about the trees in Montecito, what do you call it? All those tall trees.
The eucalyptus?
Eucalyptus.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so eucalyptus it's complex. It depends. Out at Elwood, we're preserving and planting eucalyptus because it's monarch habitat. In more fire-prone zones where they're, getting a lot of fire, then the recommendation is to take them out. Generally, so is your question, what is my opinion on like whether they stay or whether they go or whether?
I love them, but
Yeah.
apparently they are gone. They're going to be gone.
They're lovely. Yeah, they are lovely. There's a lot of different species too. So some of them are more tolerant to the climate change that we're experiencing right now, and some of them are not. So a lot of them are actually dying because of the more severe and longer droughts that we're experiencing, and that can be really problematic in terms of fire risk. Because you've got these really tall trees, they've got their shreddy bark, and they've got dry canopies with volatile oils. So a lot of recommendations are moving towards taking them out. But and that definitely is part of the long-term fire mitigation strategies at Westmont and in this zone that I'm talking about. But from an ecological standpoint, we're also trying to be very cognizant of the changes in vertical structure that will occur when we remove them. So far it's just been the dead and dying ones that have been removed. It also gets very complex in terms of permitting, removing any live trees. I hear giggles in the audience because we all know. Permitting can be really problematic, and this is along a watershed in a sensitive area, so you can't bring in heavy equipment to remove trees all that easily. Yeah.
A follow-up question. There was an Eco Hero Award 2 days ago in Libera, and they awarded Kate Lindquist and her partner Brock, forgot his last name. They have an organization in San Francisco dealing with otters, but the way that they are, whenever there's a flood, they use natural woods, natural cover, to prevent the slides when there's a big rain like what we had, and it was amazing. I was very impressed. I don't know if you know their work.
I'm not familiar with their work. No, I kind of missed the name there. So if afterwards, if you, yeah, I'm mom to 2 young boys, so I probably won't remember that. So I'm going to come find you so I can actually write it down. Thank you. Yeah.
So you talked about the flammability study,
Mm-hmm.
and I assume because it was lower growth that the larger factor was time to ignition versus heat. But will you be, and I didn't realize at that moment that you were talking about creating an understory for your plantings,
Mm-hmm.
but are you going to be expanding to taller plants, trees, etc.?
We'll leave what's already there. So there's a lot of native shrubs that are present.
In your study, are you going to be expanding to taller?
Oh, including them in the actual,
Flammability,
yes. So those our partners at UCSB are doing more of the shrubs, and we'll continue working with the species that we collected data on, but then they're also going to bring in their shrubs samples as well. And so it'll be one larger conglomerate data set. Yeah. Good question.
My concern about removing the tall eucalyptus are the loss of the homes for the raptors.
Yes.
Is there
Yeah.
studies, you don't see a lot of raptors in small
Right.
homes, I don't think.
Right.
You might
They
see lots of
do
owls.
use oaks, and they do use, we have a lot of palms in the area, and so they'll sometimes be in, especially the woodpeckers. The woodpeckers use palms as well. So, and we have sycamores in the area as well. So the idea would be to definitely not remove them all right away, but to do it incrementally so they have time to relocate. And that'll be part of the study as well, is to identify where they might be relocating to. So we have one of the biologists at Westmont Amanda Sparkman, she studies ornithology and herpetology. So ornithology, the study of birds, and particularly nesting sites. She monitors those with her students, and so that's something that we can collaborate on just to make sure we're identifying where they are. Because I see them out there, and whenever we're at the site, lots of raptors, lots of woodpeckers, and so we know that removing habitat isn't something that we want to do without thought and intention. Yeah, so.
And palms are so flammable.
Mm-hmm. They're also really hard to remove. Yeah.
I'm glad I don't have a palm in my yard.
Yeah, we have a couple of random ones in that restoration site, but yeah, those are another ones that I've never seen it myself, but I've heard reports of them exploding when they catch on fire. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what is the theory on where the raptors lived before we planted eucalyptus as a non-native here? Because they weren't there to begin with.
Right.
They must have other habitat that they would
Mhm.
default to.
Yeah. So probably the oaks and the sycamores would have been the tallest native trees, at least in recent history. Yeah.
Really sick.
Mm-hmm.
We're feeling so bad, but they're living in the non-native. They obviously
Yeah.
didn't start there.
Yeah, and I actually would like to plant some sycamores. Sycamores grow faster than oaks, and so that way, if we plant some of those, we might be able to recover some of that vertical overstory loss if we do take out any more of the eucalyptus. So that could be helpful. Yeah. Again, things that we're all considering. There's no easy or straightforward answer, but lots of different minds and groups coming together to bring up all of the questions and all of the problems that could come our way to make sure we're moving forward as thoughtfully as possible. Taking into consideration the ecosystem as well as the neighboring community, the safety of the neighboring communities. Yeah.
Is there any timeline on your list?
On which list?
On the inflammability heat?
Yeah, so this summer is when we're doing the flammability chamber experiments. So that'll go probably this summer and into the fall. And so hopefully by this time next year, we'll have some really good data coming out of that. And so we can start looking and sifting through that and seeing what we come up with. Maybe our results will change, maybe they'll be the same, but it'll be a more robust data set. And this actually testing these plants in the flame chambers is a big piece of the puzzle that we knew we were missing, because we're kind of assuming these plants are affiliated with flammability, and there's been research on it, there's studies, but actually like throwing them in the chamber and burning them and measuring them equally is going to be really informative.
Chamber has to have equal humidity, doesn't it?
Oh, they're fancy
Yeah.
chambers. Oh
Right.
yeah, fancy chambers. Yeah, they're high tech, high instruments.
Same humidity.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rick.
Having witnessed firsthand the tea fire, been right there, the overwhelming force of the wind and the fire, it was just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And so those kinds of events, and having just read a book about the LA fires, strike me as you've got to be really optimistic to think that efforts towards fire resistance or fire negation even are going to be strong enough to keep those kinds of events, especially the wildland-urban situation, from happening again, or at least happening to the same severity that we saw a year ago when some of us saw here. So you've said you're taking the long view. I'm just wondering, in terms of that particular goal, how are you remaining upbeat about doing that in a way that is not sort of a fantasy when the next fire comes down from those mountains, from those hills?
So the main question is, how am I remaining optimistic? Like, why bother is kind of
Well,
the
a
question.
little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
It's kind of a devil's advocate.
No,
question,
no,
but
I
just,
yeah.
just, it seems both in terms of the longevity
Mhm.
required for that to make
Yeah.
any kind of significant difference.
Yeah.
Yes, I can see removing the eucalyptus might have saved some homes in our neighborhood. And you're right about them exploding. It was just unbelievable how they were exploding that night. But it just feels at an emotional level
Mhm.
like it's Goliath and you are David with a few stones.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a big issue. I mean, I'll just share a couple of thoughts before I come back to the, how do I remain optimistic portion of it. Yeah, I mean, I'm very careful to never claim that planting native oaks is going to be, the answer to providing fire safety for our communities. I'm very careful to never say that oaks prevent the spread of fire. You'll talk to firefighters who say, like, yes, absolutely, they have witnessed embers going into an oak canopy and actually getting sequestered and burning out. They have seen this, so that's positive. But you will also talk to many firefighters who say they've seen tons of oaks burn. They will burn those oak canopies. And then you bring wind into it as well, where it doesn't even matter. I mean, it could be those embers can blow half a mile or more. So they might bypass our site altogether, if they're coming from above on a high wind night. And so that's not something that we have any control over, and that can be really overwhelming. Additionally, we're restoring in a site that is still identified as a staging area for Montecito Fire Department. So the next time a disaster comes along, there will be trucks at our site, and they will be driving on our site, and they will be bulldozing parts of our site. It will happen, and this is something that we have thought about in terms of considering our planting palette, where we put the oaks, etc. Is like what things might be able to oaks if they get bulldozed. That's not much is gonna happen there in terms of the recovery. But there are some other plants that can resprout after that, regenerate after that. And so so that's something we have to consider as well. We're putting all this time and effort and money and energy into a site that when the next disaster comes along is going to be the staging area and be, covered with fire trucks and fire personnel. So those are all the things that I think about on a regular basis and are really serious considerations. I think it's so when I think about the impact that my work is making, though, I try to think that it's so much more than my one site. The knowledge that we're trying to gain and the practices that we're trying to establish are ones that don't work if it's just, if one person is creating a fire perimeter around their home, but the rest of the community is not, it doesn't matter. You have to get the word out there. You have to get the information and the education out there for others to follow suit and to make it more of a community endeavor. And when that happens, I think that's when you start to see impacts. That's when you start to see improvements in the area. And I'm hopeful that we're not working in an island. I mentioned before that there's so many people with so many agencies, again, some of them represented here today, that are working to answer these questions and trying to understand them and working on collaborations. And that's one thing since being at Westmont, I've really, really been dedicated to making connections in the community and building collaborative relationships so that we can all be working together to understand these problems, understand the unique variations in different communities, to make the best assessments and the best predictions possible. So I guess it's more that I'm not expecting my one restoration site and what I'm doing to make all the difference, but on a larger scale with so many people working on these problems, that the information and education might be there to hopefully expand the impact. But it's still not going to stop an ember from blowing a half a mile or a mile ahead of a fire front. That's something that's still really problematic.
I was just going to say, more optimistically, the oaks on our property, most of them burned, but they came back, and then the vegetation, I mean, the house, everything was gone, but it was miraculous to see plants return, at least some plants, within months, really, and to see green restoration, resilience happening.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing that. Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned collaboration with I'm a member of Lotusland next door.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And I spend a lot of time. They've been in the last 6 months moving a lot of big
Notice.
chunks of trees.
Yeah.
Do they consult you at all, or you see Santa Barbara for this work?
I have not been consulted. No, we go there on field trips. We we go there and enjoy it, but I haven't been consulted. No, I think they have. There's such a unique community of plants. They're not really focusing on California natives or anything like that. So they're more exotics. So it's a very different plant palette and would require much different recommendations. So yeah.
I was just curious, in my early days at Westmont Downtown, they used to do controlled burns in the hillside to try to do fuel reduction. And at some point that went out of favor, I think California-wide. Was it a good idea to do controlled burns? Bad idea?
That's the $1 million question in this room and in the chaparral. If you've noticed, there have been some controlled burns recently. So it depends. It depends on who you're talking to. There are folks that are vehemently against controlled burns in the chaparral, and there are folks that say it is necessary when you're trying to clear space, both for defensibility of homes, but also accessibility for fire personnel, because the chaparral is thick and really dangerous to get through when you're a firefighter trying to, scale those hill slopes and protect people's homes. So I think it depends. If you ever want to sit down, there's literature on both sides. So if you'd ever like to go out and grab coffee and talk about it more, I'd be happy to.
We lost our house in the Tea Fire. We were very famous, the first house to burn.
Oh.
But what happened, it burned to the ground, but our ficus hedge, it's Ficus nitida, green gem, was a heat sink. And it burned, but not so much. And it saved 2 little houses on our house, on the property. So are you working with that concept of heat sink as a plant?
Well, yeah, I think it all goes into the larger pool of flammability. And heat sink isn't really a term that we use a lot in my studies, because I focus more on the Southern California native plant realm. And again, they're drought tolerant plants. A lot of them are drought deciduous. They lose their leaves, and they're just a different type of plant. They're not holding on to a lot of moisture during the hottest parts of the year. That's just, and they're not being watered generally. But yeah, the goal of our work is to start with the California natives and understand these traits of these flammability traits, and then be able, if we can create reliable models, we could apply them to non-native species and other ornamentals. Because we're not, I'm not anti-exotic plant species. We're just starting small because it's such a complex system. We're trying to understand the California natives, and then maybe we can start expanding that and applying it to other ornamental species that act more as heat sinks. But it's interesting to use that term because I think it's just because I work in dry, scruffy Southern California plants. Not a lot of them. I'm imagining the ficus probably holds on to a lot of water in the leaves. And that's how it could potentially act as a heat sink, where it just kind of burns slowly but doesn't spread, is my guess.
Yeah.
But
the only part of the hedge we lost was because it was next to a neighbor's palm
Mm.
which burst.
And that burst, yeah.
We were not there to see
Yeah.
it, but that's what you see happen.
Yeah, quick raise of hands, by the way. How many of you lost your homes in the T fire in this room? Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty substantial for a small group. So thank you all for coming. And I hope that I treated the topic with respect and honored the significant event that it was in your lives. I know that bringing it up can be a really emotional thing, and I hope I treated it respectfully in this talk.